Hey everybody, so in this video I'm going to talk about how to learn unsimplified piano pieces, both hands, as a total beginner or beginner using River Flows in You as an example. So here's the music of one of my current students. And you can see that there's all these different markings here. So we're using my logical methodology and this notation that I created. And it's basically this idea of using strategy or logic or the skill of decision making itself, all these little micro decisions, as opposed to having to go through lots of finger exercises, scales, theory, easy pieces, or other traditional frameworks. Not that those are negative things. They can be very, very powerful later on or at the right time, but it's not required from the start. And so there are some other little caveats, but I'll go into that in a bit. So on this channel, I hope to share with you guys strategies, thoughts, mindsets, etc., often of my own creation that I hope will help you in your piano playing, hopefully other areas of your life as well. So I've taught many, many beginners and total beginners River Flows in You as their first goal piece or dream piece. And I mean, the world is vast. There are many, many different types and levels of piano teachers and different specializations. But for me, I broadly estimate that a typical adult total beginner, it would probably be 3 to 5 years or more sometimes if they wanted to learn a piece of this difficulty. And then there's always the question of how well are they playing it in the end? Are they playing all pages of River Flows in You from memory? Are they playing it solidly without stopping? Can they do it in basically any situation? Like they go over a friend's house, could they play it if somebody comes over? Could they play it for them confidently with no stopping or very little stopping? Are they playing at a high musical and technical level? So they're relaxed, they're moving very easily, and it sounds beautiful, even from a classical standpoint. So by these standards, some people really might never reach the point where they're really playing River Flows in You. So, but with these methods, I'm happy to say that it's been a typical thing where somebody reaches out, they've never played the piano before, they've never read sheet music, they've never played any sort of musical instrument, and it could be that they're performing River Flows in You in front of a live audience, if they want to, within 6 to 12 months. And it is at a high musical level, and it's memorized, and it's a very solid performance. That's about the average of what happens. There are more extreme cases, really, really crazy cases. And then there are cases where the person might learn slower than the average person, and there's no judgment from me, of course, that's totally fine, but it'll still be greatly accelerated progress for them. So a big part of this is the logical methodology that I've created. If you're watching this on YouTube, I often will reference many of my other videos and playlists. So actually, if you search my name, David Chang, 14 Layers of Strategy as Applied to River Flows in You, there's actually a very, very much more extended than this video example of just 14 somewhat arbitrary layers or 14 components of my strategy, of which there are really hundreds and hundreds and more being created always over time. That's a way more extended example than this, so you can look that up if you're curious. There's also a logical methodology playlist if you search that in my name. I think some other little caveats, you don't want to hurt yourself, certainly. Some people, they play and it's fine from the start. Other times they may carry random amounts of tension. And so if you search David Chang holding and relaxing, that will teach you some useful ideas in terms of not hurting yourself. You shouldn't play through pain. You don't want to make yourself really sore or even hurt yourself. So if you look for also David Chang physical methodology, I think it opens with 2 little YouTube shorts, at least at the time of recording this video, and then it goes into other things like hand orientation, holding and relaxing, posture, etc. So please make sure to take care of yourself as well too. If you don't know how to read sheet music, surprisingly, it's not that difficult to at least know how to read the treble clef and bass clef slowly. I often will just recommend my students go through the first, I think it's the first unit of Alfred Music Theory. You can get that off of Amazon or wherever you get books. And just completing that, it doesn't mean you can find the notes very, very quickly, but it means that you'll be able to find the treble and bass clef even slowly. And I really think you don't need to dumb it down for adults. Right after I have them do the theory pages, it may sound crazy, but if they've never read sheet music before, I have them go through that unit. Usually there's no problem. If there are little issues, then I just go over it with them. But adults really can usually follow the directions and the diagrams. then I might have them try something very simple from an adult beginner book. But it really takes no more than 1 or 2 lessons at most. And no later than the 3rd lesson, I will start them on the equivalent of River Flows in You, believe it or not, even if they've never read sheet music or played before. Because the best way for them to test their theory, their theoretical knowledge, is the practice, the practical aspect of actually just going into the music. And then they'll have to find the notes. And if you search David Chang Teaching by Not Teaching or Teaching by Not Teaching Part 2 or something like that, you'll see some of my teaching philosophy in terms of you always have the person just try the given thing instead of just feeding them all the answers. Like a mock SAT, for instance, you take the test, the teacher or you learn all of your strengths and weaknesses, and then afterwards you fill in the gaps, and that's how you learn. That's what leads to deeper learning rather than an open book test, which really would ruin the whole point of the assessment. And so a lot of the time it's better to just try the given thing, and then hopefully either you can assess yourself afterwards or a great teacher can then assess you. And so then I will assess and say like, oh, your right hand is an octave higher than it's supposed to be, and this is why. Or your left hand is playing all white keys, and here are how some of the black keys work, and this is why, and they'll remember that much better. So these are some of the little caveats that I'm taking care of here at the outset of this video. In terms of once these are taken care of, so we make sure the person's not going to hurt themselves. We make sure that, and usually there's not too much of a danger of this, honestly, unless you're playing for long periods of time, and just, like I said, don't play through pain. And then they can read the treble and bass clef even very, very slowly. Then I'll just get them started on this. And so then the rest of this video assumes that you are playing without soreness or pain, and that you are at least able to read the treble bass clef slowly, either with the help of a teacher or through some self-teaching through YouTube and other resources. So you can read little tiny fragments, separate hands. So for instance, in something like River Flows in You, I guess the prerequisite, either through your own efforts or with the help of a teacher, would be you can play little tiny fragments of one hand, and they're very good, even if it's just a few notes, believe it or not. And this would assume that you have been able to self-teach, or with the help of a teacher, been able to understand like the key signature, that there's an F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, all the F's, C's, and G's in this piece, that they are sharped pretty much. If this seems difficult, then you may need to consult some other resources, but this is assuming that you can play at least one hand alone, little sections, and the notes are correct. Believe it or not, shockingly, it's not so difficult to get to that point as long as you're reading the notes slowly. So now that we've assumed this, I just want to show you. If you follow along with the channel for a while, then you've seen many examples of this notation, but I'm always assuming that there are many new people that are going to be watching that they haven't seen any of this before. So in my logical methodology, and by the way, this is a real student's music, so for some reason this student thought it was a good idea to highlight kind of everything. We should probably have them erase this at some point, but I wanted to show you a real student's music to see how it truly applies. So in my logical methodology, I call the little sections that we practice sets, and that really doesn't mean anything except for a section plus one more note. So for instance, a one measure set would be one measure. So for instance, like from this star all the way to over here, one measure plus one more note or one more chord. So it's always an entire section plus one more thing. And if I were to play from here all the way to here without any mistakes, and let's say that if you search David Chang, what I mean by quality in piano progress, I think the title is something similar to that. I go into a little bit more elaboration, but basically it means like perfect, like notes, ideally rhythm, and no stopping at all, from memory, nice and solid, just a nice kind of all loud touch. You can search David Chang all loud with accents touch if you want to see what I mean by that. And so it's basically just solid, probably from memory, and it's very good. It's to a very high quality, the best that you can muster. There's no hesitating or anything. So if you can do that, then you would mark a 1 in this case, if you were to play one measure plus one more note. And let me turn this around for a moment. So this notation helps you keep track of any little tiny sections that you have practiced, and this way it frees up your mind to make higher level decisions. So as you can probably tell here, I would have the student practice all these little tiny fragments, and you could see that they're actually smaller than ones. They could be halves of a measure, they could be quarters of a measure. I'm going to show you some examples where they're even smaller. And each of these points I'm going to say in a moment, there's no time to go into in this video. I know I tend to go on and on and on. So just a few things. First of all, spaced repetition. So this is the idea that if you forget something and then you have to relearn again, every time that you forget and relearn, it will make that thing stronger. So we have this premise. You can search David Chang's spaced repetition or forgetting on purpose. I think that was one of my first talking videos for more details about that. But yeah, when you learn a given section, instead of repeating it 10 times, like massed practice, or 20 times, that's not going to help. It gives you the illusion of knowing, according to the learning research. And instead, if you forgot it and then relearned it 7 times or 10 times, even in a given day, that may be like getting a whole week's worth of practice in a day. Because you are spending that effort of retrieval, spending that cognitive effort. So we have that premise. We have the idea of practicing little sections, and then they're gradually expanding into larger ones, right? This makes sense to us. But basically, if I say, even one hand alone, oh, student, could you play a 2-measure set, 2 measures plus the next beat? It may be too hard for you especially if you're a total beginner. If you're a beginner, certainly that might be too difficult to do right off the bat. Could you do 2 measures, and is it to a very good quality? It's very solid, no hesitating, let alone from memory and to any of your other specifications. But if that's too difficult, can you do a 1-measure set, 1 measure plus the next beat? If that's too difficult, could you do half a measure plus the next beat? And maybe we even start from something smaller, like a 1/4 measure set, which would be a 1/4 of a measure plus 1 more note or the next beat. And that may be the size of the section that you need to start from in order to preserve the quality that you're looking for. We're looking for very small, very, very, very good things, I suppose, instead of medium, so-so things, which is where we run into all of the problems, frankly. So anyway, so we have this premise of starting from very small to a very high quality, and then, like I was saying, expanding the sections. And you can combine these concepts together. So we have the forgetting and then relearning, but then we also have this idea of starting from small sections and then them gradually getting larger. So you can actually basically, I call it solving, just playing little tiny sections to a very high quality. And indeed, they're sets, like I was saying in my method. It's always a little section plus the next beat. So there's always a point of overlap. And then you move on from all of them. Let's say you do 20 little tiny things. You come back, and then you can combine those 20 tiny, very tiny things into 10 slightly larger things. And then maybe you move on, you come back, you've forgotten everything. And believe it or not, even though you forgot everything, the next time through, you can still link these 10 small things into 5 medium-sized things. So that's what's happening in the music. If we started from 1/4 measure fragments, and that's all that you could do at the time, these 1/4 measure sets, a 1/4 of a measure plus the next beat in each case, it might be that we're doing these little tiny sections through a large area, then we come back and then we link all of them into half measure sets. Then the third pass through, we link all of them into 1 measure sets. And that is what this student is doing here sometimes. And indeed, as you've guessed it, we actually will start with separate hands in order to then do both hands on a future pass. And in these cases, so when this student has marked a 1/4, technically each one should be exactly vertically aligned over the starting point. So the student could be a little bit neater, but literally a 1/4 of a, well, actually, I guess this one's a little special because this is in 5/4. Maybe we can choose another example. So let's say this part over here. So if you're able to see oh, this is half of a measure and this is the second half of the measure. Here we have half of a measure plus the next note. So that would literally be from here to here. Half of a measure plus 1 more note. And since this student's able to play that correctly, then he marks half inside of these square brackets vertically aligned over the start point. That means he's played the right hand from memory to a very, very good quality, even one time, just a single time, and then he'll mark that marking there. And that's very counterintuitive, but again, we don't care if we forget it. We will move on from it. We will come back and then review it and expand it subsequent times. So even just a single time, you don't have to do it on command. Don't be dismayed if you forget it. This is on purpose that we're going to forget it. We're just going to move on from it. So again, very counterintuitive, but just a single time to your specifications, and then you would mark this. Now, if some of you have seen other videos of mine, you probably have heard me explain this same sort of long speech many, many different times, many different aspects. I still think it will genuinely help you. So for new viewers, hopefully that this is helpful in some way. But as you watch more of my videos, if you hear me explain basically the same things, it's still using slightly different language. There's slightly different things, because I'm just speaking off the cuff, right? Like as if we're in a regular private lesson. So there's naturally going to be other things I emphasize, other words I use, and then those, we might happen upon the secret words for you where it finally clicks. Because these concepts, even though none of them are rocket science or brain surgery or whatever it may be, working with many highly intelligent, super successful adults, it still takes a little bit before it truly clicks. Like the YouTube videos themselves are not as powerful as me, directly giving feedback to the person, of course, but we do the best that we can. And so hopefully as you watch more of these, it'll unlock more for you. So you hear the same type of explanation, different nuances, different aspects over and over again. Just like reading a good book. There's the good book, maybe it only has like 4 or 5 main points, but because there are many examples and anecdotes, it sinks into your system deeper and deeper over time. Rereading the book will do the same thing. And that's the case for the practicing of the music too. There's different parts of it you're going to pay attention to as you come back and you relearn them over and over again, hence leading to deeper learning. So in any case, you just solve each little section just one time, and then you'll move on rapidly. And so then you can mark a lot of markings throughout this page. And indeed, that is what this student did or has done. So he's marked a half measure set here, then he marked quarter measure set. So a quarter of a measure, I'll just say that a quarter of a measure would be from, let's see if I can get this to work. Okay, quarter of a measure plus one more note. So he's marked quarter above this in square brackets. Same thing from here to here, quarter of a measure, plus one more note. So we've marked a quarter here. That's what this signifies. So each one does from memory to a high quality and then moves on rapidly. And then that was my instruction to him too, even though he's a beginner. I think not a total beginner, but still a beginner that didn't have much experience and certainly never played anything remotely as difficult as this both ends. And I've taught many, many total beginners as well too, this piece. So then he's covering a very, very wide area. Because you think about it, when he's away from me, there was no evidence initially that he would be able to solve both hand sets. Like it would be too difficult even to do a little section both hands. So then since I determined he's able to do this, just do a lot of this thing that we know that you can do. Like if this is the extent of the difficulty of coordination you can handle independently, then why not do everything of that level of problem, that level of strategy? And then this way, when he comes to the lesson next time, he's already constructed these beautiful little puzzle pieces for me. And then the square, and then I have the skill to then teach him how to link them together. So these square brackets, they signify separate hand sets. So if they're vertically aligned over the right hand, they refer to right hand sets, which is always just a section plus the next beat. Now, the left hand, I think he did more on the first page, or maybe you just forgot to mark some of these. So if you were to do the left hand, a half measure set, which, let's say there's a half a measure and then one more note, it would be, you can mark the marking vertical line underneath. And it doesn't matter about the colors either. I mean, in my own music, I just use plain graphite pencil. I just use paper and pencil. I'm still pretty old-fashioned. Half a measure plus one more note. I can mark a half here. So this would be the case here. And the default strategy for solving any set is adding in reverse. And you can search David Chang adding in reverse. I think I have several videos on that. Maybe I should make more, actually. Apparently, when you make a piece of content or you give a certain type of lesson, it's always helpful, just like I was saying earlier in the video, to still have repeating in many different types of ways, because that's what happens in private lessons. Often you get told the same thing over and over and over again, and only gradually sinks in over time. So the way to solve even a separate hand area is adding in reverse. So if the student cannot play from here to here, and that may very well be the case as a beginner student, it may be, first of all, this is probably too difficult for a total beginner student. I mean, we try to play from here to here, and that might be unsuccessful. We might actually try to go from here to here. Quarter measure set, quarter of a measure plus one more note. Now, these three notes, if anyone amongst you is like an intermediate, I'm sure it's very, very easy for you, but it might not be easy for a total beginner. You got to slowly read the notes. Okay, so now these three notes are in your short-term memory, and you know where they are. And then we might play like just from here to here. And then we would mark a quarter. Okay, that's really messy, but it's supposed to say quarter. Now, believe it or not, even within this, we can still use strategy, or the skill of like this micro decision making. So the adding in reverse, I mean, you could play just this note on its own, then you could play just these two notes from left to right, here to there, and then you could play the entire thing. That's the strategy. And if it doesn't go well, you go back to the blue, then you maybe go back to the green, back to the blue, back to the red. So even within this little universe here, you might still need to break it down smaller as a total beginner in order to solve this quarter measure set. And then it would be the same thing for this next one. So it may be that in order to get this quarter measure set, I mean, this is actually looks a little tricky. You might have to play this note alone, then these two notes from left to right, and then this entire thing from left to right. Okay. So the first time that the student went through this music, I think that he marked many, many quarter measure sets, and we did work up to this too. I mean, on the first page, he had started from really small, and that's how he's even able to conceive of playing these as a beginner. Now, the next time through, we'll start to use my rule of expansion. We're going to start to expand from smaller into larger areas, and you can search David Chang Rule of Expansion. It's part of the 14 Layers of Strategy as applied to River Flows and You playlist as well. And believe it or not, there's no downside, even though you may have totally forgotten these sections. Most people would consider maybe just reviewing them, but actually we will try to combine them into a half measure set. And that sounds crazy, because why would you try to combine this section together if you didn't even remember the component elements? But there's really no downside to this. And if you're playing from here, let's see. If you are playing from here to here, and these are just visual markers to let you see what I'm talking about. They're not my actual logical methodology markers are these things within the square brackets, which show separate hand areas that you've done correctly from here to here, quarter measure set, and then this one here to here as a quarter measure set, which I've marked here. But these are just as little visual reminders. And still, the way to solve any set is adding in reverse. So even though you already did these the previous pass through, and just to be clear, you probably would do this through a wide area. It could be 3 lines or the whole page even, so that you had a lot of time to forget. It could take several days or a week or longer. But in any case, at some point you come back, you want to link these into a half measure set. And sometimes I'm asked that, like, oh, when do I link them together? And the answer is as long as some time has passed. It could be 15 minutes. It could be 2 weeks. And that's just the beginning of strategic style. Like there are many different possibilities for when do you come back. Do you come back after like a few days? Do you come back after like a week or two? Or do you come back in the same practice session even later in the day? It's up to you. As long as some time has passed, you can try to link it together. And so even though you've solved these component elements, we're still going to go ahead and try to solve this half measure set here. And we're still going to add in reverse. We might play just this note on its own. Then we might play the last 2 notes from left to right. Then we might play the last 3 notes left to right. Then we might play the last 4 notes left to right, and then we might do the entire thing. And that's our default strategy. We might go back to the blue, the green, the purple. If it doesn't go well, we go back to the blue, the green, etc. And the reason why there's no downside, even if I fail, and if I fail, I might mark half and a capital A for attempted. I've reviewed the component quarter measure sets anyway, hopefully from memory to a very high quality with no stopping. And I've created more overlap in between because I tried to solve it, and then maybe I tried to play from the beginning. So I've resolved the quarter measure sets anyway. I've redone them, I've reviewed them, and then I've created more overlap. So there's no downside to trying. And then if you're successful, then you would erase all this stuff and mark half. And it's up to you to decide how strict to be about this. I would recommend being quite strict in terms of no hesitations at all. And as I made a video that probably came out last week, because I record like a bunch of these in advance, called, I think, solving impossible piano pieces with microscopic strategy or something like that. And the example I used was Chopin Nocturne in E flat major. I'm realizing sometimes these very extended, like over half an hour long videos, it is helpful because I'm able to get into like some level of detail that I might in lessons, and I hope it's helpful to you guys. I know I tend to go on, but it's like this, even the very beginnings of strategy are so nuanced and detailed, and that's what makes the big difference, because your raw skill at this, at understanding these nuances, will determine what you then multiply 100-fold or 1,000-fold. So if you don't really understand what I'm saying in terms of a quarter measure set, it's good to go back through this video, understand and watch more videos of mine, and then if you feel you better understand, then you can cover a much wider area with confidence. So the covering of this wide area, you don't want to get stuck in one spot. You might do these separate. You could do right hand alone, quarter measure sets through like a whole page, and then left hand alone, quarter measure sets through a whole page. And this isn't a simplification necessarily. There could be variations. There could be areas that are easier and you mark halves and so on. But in any case, so you do that. Let's say it takes quite a while. Let's say it takes a week or longer. You don't even go back and review anything. Believe it or not, next pass through, rule of expansion. Search my name and rule of expansion if you want some more details here. But you would take all of those quarter measure sets in your right hand and then expand them into half measure sets using the adding and reverse principle. So you see there's a lot of layers here already. So this is like there's a fairly deep video, even though it's still a very, very, very high level view. And then you solve all the half measure sets on the whole page. Maybe some of them aren't successful and you mark attempts instead. And then the same thing with the left. You mark half measure set attempts, or if you solve them, then you combine all those little quarter measure set pairs into half measure sets all the way through. Even if you totally forgot them, just try it. There's no downside to it. Now, next would be what I call my rule of transition. You can search David Chang rule of transition. And this is when you're going from both hands to separate hands. And this is the idea that it should be at least a 2-to-1 ratio. If you've solved half measure separate hand sets, that means half measure right hand alone, half measure left hand alone, you should not try half measure both hand sets the next pass through. So, you've gone through the whole page again or a large section. You don't want to get stuck in like 3 measures. That's not enough spacing. Like, you want some time to pass, your brain to have rest, etc. Then come back, and that'll lead to deeper learning. So in any case, you shouldn't try to do half measure both hand sets here, because it's not like 1 + 1 = 2, so to speak, in like doing things separate hands and then you can just magically combine them together. I wouldn't start with larger than quarter measure both hand sets. So that means let's go to this real example here. So this student has done a right hand half measure set, right hand alone from there to there, left hand alone from there to there. We would not try for more than a quarter measure set both hands. Wait, let me check that this is right. Yes. So from here to here, we would do no larger than this to attempt to play both hands together. And so all of this, like this half hour so far in this video, has been building up to like, how do you actually, so it's like, you see, I was planning the foundation this whole time, because the foundation of the building needs to be solid. So you've done all these little component elements. All of it has gone through forgetting and then relearning to consolidate the memory and make it more solid. All of it has gone through memory consolidation during sleep, because we can't fight that biological fact as humans. So they're not strangers anymore. Even if you don't consciously remember everything about these coordinations, it's amazing. Even when students like don't practice in lessons with me, even though it's good if they practice, but even if they didn't have time to practice because they're too busy as busy adults, even if they do not consciously remember the coordinations, when we try to link them together, like both hands, these sections, it still invariably goes better than if they hadn't done them at all, because the body and mind recorded perfect or high quality little coordinations at some point. And so at this point, if the student wants to link this section together both hands, and you can just ignore this highlighter here, the strategy for linking together both hands is still adding in reverse, but it's separate them both for each step. And you can look that up too. You can search David Chang adding in reverse for both hands. It's part of the 14 layers of strategy as applied to verb flows in you, that playlist. So it might be that you play right hand alone, left hand alone. Actually, I guess let's erase this stuff. So you might play that you play right hand alone, left hand alone, and then both. And then you might play right hand alone, left hand alone, and then both. And then you might do right hand alone, left hand alone, both. Notice that here there isn't even another left hand note, and so then you would just not, you would just play these two notes again if there's not actually a note that aligns here. Now, obviously, there might be some amongst you that's like, oh, I can't even understand like this notation or what it is that you're doing. So there's no time to go into that in this video, unfortunately, but you'll just get the basic idea. Then you might do like right hand alone, left hand alone, and then both, and then the entire thing. It could be right hand alone, left hand alone, and then both. So it's still adding in reverse, but you're doing left, right, both for every single step. And then if that doesn't go well, you would go through that entire process again. And if you were to do that, then you would mark a quarter, and you could erase these separate hand markers, because separate hand markers, they're with square brackets. If you did both hands, quarter of a measure plus one more note, then I would mark them in these curly brackets, and I would write 1/4. Now, interestingly, recently I've been thinking, and maybe I can make a shorter video about this at some point. Sometimes, like if anything, I'm willing to go smaller more often. So, and that section was illustrative. Even a quarter measure both hands set, that's pretty difficult. And so if we look back on the first page, look at this. The student started solving quarter measure sets, but it seemed like it was taking kind of long. And so then even though he had done half measure sets, separate hands, we actually decided to not do quarter measure both hand sets. We decided to do eighth measure both hand sets. And eighth measure both hand sets, they, like for instance, the first eighth measure both hand set, because this is a quarter, right? This would be like this is like the first quarter of the measure. This would be like the second quarter of the measure, etc. Right? This would be the third quarter, and then this last one can be the fourth. I mean, it is the fourth quarter of the measure. So that's why when I say quarter measure set, it's a quarter of a measure plus one more beat, quarter of a measure plus one more beat, etc. Let me erase that for a bit, and you can ignore the yellow highlighter, of course. Like I said, that's basically irrelevant. We should probably have him erase that. So it follows then that obviously this is the first half of this quarter, and an eighth measure set would be this. It would be these two notes plus one more note. So this would be the first eighth measure set, an eighth of a measure plus one more note. The second eighth measure set would, using this as a point of overlap, it'd be an eighth of a measure plus one more note. Okay. Now, the strategy stays the same, even if you were to solve an eighth measure set. So this means that you might play in adding in reverse, and again, search David Chang, adding in reverse for both hands. You've got right hand alone, left hand alone, and then both. Then from left to right, right hand, oh, what have I done? I've moved over everything. Let's see. Okay, there we go. Might be right hand alone, left to right, left hand alone. So basically it's just this note again, and then both. And it might seem unnecessary to go through all these steps, but I found it was best for this student, for most students, especially total beginners or beginners. Right hand alone, I guess from here to here, left hand alone, and then both. And that is the default strategy, this 9-step process, starting from the end point, each thing making the next thing more likely to succeed in order to solve this eighth measure set. So this marking means that he played from here to here, from memory to a very high quality, and then we marked that. And then he did that with every single other one of these. I think he did these on his own, and then we did these in the lesson. I think we've only had maybe like 6 lessons or something like that, believe it or not. So it's pretty crazy, like what he's able to coordinate now. Like these are the magical exercises to get him to be able to play this piece. A normal teacher would probably conclude like, oh, he's not going to be able to play this. I got to put him on like probably 3 years or something because he wasn't able to play these little sections easily. But I think it's just because they're not specific enough about strategy. And then with this logical notation system, this I mentioned briefly earlier, this will free up your mind to be able to use higher order strategy. Like when I notate all the eighths, quarters, halves, etc., I can come back and be like, oh, here are 2 eighths I can link together. Here are 2 quarters I can link together. I think most people are way too overconfident about their ability to remember which little tiny sections they've practiced, even if they have the insight to practice in tiny sections, which they usually do not. So in any case, now that we've solved all these eighth measure sets, the next lesson with this student, I would be very interested in solving quarter measure sets with him. And just to be clear, these eighth measure sets, either he's going to solve these eighths or he'll solve quarter measure sets through like this entire page. You can already see he's solved many, many different areas here. And then I would want to coach him and see, oh, is he skilled enough to link these quarter measure sets together? So I would use that same strategy still to link these two eighth measure sets together, and then I would mark a quarter. I would observe him practicing and see if he really knows how to solve these quarters well. And he probably does. And then, what he's responsible for this week is covering this, because he's done a lot of them. So it shouldn't be too difficult for him. This is also an exact repeat. This is an exact repeat of this. So once you've done this, like, you would just copy over the repeats. You don't need to solve the exact same problem again. If you notice this is going to be the same as this, which it is, including the endpoints, then you can just copy those markings over. So he'd be responsible for covering this entire first page with these quarter and eighth measure both hand set markings. And then the next pass through, maybe all of them turn into quarter measure sets. Maybe the next pass through, we would link all the quarter measure sets and expand them using that rule of expansion into half measure sets. And then the next time through into one measure sets. And it's the same thing. Even when you link one measure sets, it might still be that you're adding either single notes or possibly pairs of notes, separate them both for each step. Same process. And then next pass through might be that we do two measure sets, then we do four measure sets, then we do eights, and then we do the whole page. And all of it was from memory from the start. So the memory also just magically, logically links together. Now, this, like I've said multiple times, is really just the very, very beginnings of strategy. If you do all of this on the first page, there's a big opportunity cost for not having planted seeds on the second page. So if that took you 6 weeks to go through the whole first page, which is a pretty good deal, like if you are a total beginner, for you to be able to link together the entire first page of River Flows and You from memory to a very high quality, and I've had even much more extreme results with students than that's an amazing thing. It not just playing the piece, but you've gained an entire bank of knowledge, an entire world of knowledge about how to practice that you can then carry over to all future pieces and even more ambitious pieces. But if you've done nothing on the second page, then you'll be starting from scratch, and that'll take 6 weeks. And the third page will also take 6 weeks. But what if you'd already been working on the second page for 5 weeks? Things don't come before their time, but if something really needs 6 weeks to come to fruition, then it's a good idea to get started earlier. So maybe let's say that it takes you 3 months to put together a given both hands coordination. So if you get stuck in one little area, that's the only area where you can reap the harvest. 3 months later, you reap the harvest of these 3 measures. But how about doing what you can do, doing these little tiny sections, like separate hand areas over like a very, very wide area, like 2-3 pages even, and then 3 months later, you may reap the harvest of all 3 pages because they went through quarter measure separate hand sets, then they went through half measure separate hand sets, and then eighth measure both hand sets, then quarter measure both hand sets, then half measure both hand sets, one measure both hand sets, 2s, 4s, 8s, entire pages, and the entire piece links together. So anyway, so I hope I got you thinking. If you're new, I hope that this changes some of your views about what's possible in terms of your practice. But this entire category of things is really just one of the playlists on the channel. If you look at my physical methodology playlist, logistical methodology, performance training, or whatever it's called, and let's see what else, mindset, mental practice. My physical methodology goes into a lot more in terms of technique and how you gain speed and so on. They're all just many, many other dozens and hundreds of layers that you can start to implement. And there's no tried and true order. It's basically like a custom course you're creating for yourself, or if you have some guidance, then I or somebody else can recommend the correct order for you to go through specific for your situation. So anyway, so hope you found this useful. Please like, subscribe, let other people know about the channel if you did, and looking forward to the next one.